What you're about to hear is a tale so terrifying, so steeped in primal horror and supernatural transformation, that it has haunted the bayous and backstreets of New Orleans for over a century. This is not merely another werewolf legend whispered around campfires in the Louisiana swamplands. This is the documented account of a woman driven beyond the boundaries of human endurance, transformed by ancient curses and maternal fury into something that stalked the night with claws sharper than razors, and a hunger that could only be satisfied by the blood of those who preyed upon the innocent. This is the true story of the Rougarou woman, and the hunt that turned the streets of New Orleans into a supernatural killing ground where justice wore the face of a beast. The year was 1903, and New Orleans stood at the crossroads of the old century and the new, its cobblestone streets echoing with the sounds of progress and change. Electric streetlights were beginning to illuminate the French Quarter's shadowy corners, while the distant whistle of steamships on the Mississippi announced the arrival of commerce from around the world. Yet beneath this veneer of modernity, the ancient darkness that had always lurked in the city's heart continued to stir, waiting for the right moment to remind the civilized world that some hungers could never be tamed by law or social convention. The Treme district, with its vibrant community of free people of color and its rich traditions of music, spirituality, and cultural resistance, remained a place where the old ways held power over those who knew how to listen to the whispers of their ancestors. It was here, in a modest shotgun house on Ursuline Street, that Celeste Boudreau lived with her 3 young children, struggling to maintain her family's dignity and survival in a world that offered few opportunities for a woman of her circumstances. Celeste was a woman of remarkable strength and beauty, her Creole heritage evident in the graceful lines of her face and the fierce intelligence that burned in her dark eyes. Born in 1875 to a family that had achieved modest prosperity through careful investments and hard work, she had been educated in the traditions of both French Catholic culture and the African spiritual practices that her grandmother had brought from Haiti. This dual heritage had given her a deep understanding of both the visible and invisible worlds that shaped human experience. The death of her husband, Jean-Baptiste Boudreau, in a dock accident in 1901 had left Celeste alone with 3 children under the age of 10, Marie-Claire, aged 9, Pierre, aged 7, and little Evangeline, just 5 years old. Jean-Baptiste had been a skilled carpenter whose steady income had provided the family with security and respectability within their community. His sudden death not only devastated Celeste emotionally but also thrust her into a desperate struggle for economic survival that would test every resource she possessed. In the months following her husband's death, Celeste had exhausted every conventional means of supporting her family. She took in laundry, worked as a seamstress, and even sold the few pieces of jewelry that represented her family's modest wealth. However, these efforts proved insufficient to meet the basic needs of her household, and she found herself facing the terrible prospect of losing her home and being forced to place her children in an orphanage where their fate would be uncertain at best. It was during this period of desperation that Celeste first encountered the men who would ultimately transform her from a grieving widow into an instrument of supernatural vengeance. These individuals operated what appeared to be a charitable organization dedicated to helping struggling families in the Treme district, offering loans and assistance to those who had fallen on hard times. Their leader was a man named Lucien Thibodeau, a well-dressed Creole gentleman who spoke with eloquence about the importance of community solidarity and mutual support. Thibodeau's organization, which called itself the Société de Bienfaisance Creole, presented itself as a benevolent society dedicated to preserving Creole culture and providing assistance to families in need. The society operated from an elegant townhouse in the French Quarter, and its membership included several prominent businessmen and professionals who were respected figures in the community. To desperate families like Celeste's, the organization appeared to be a godsend, offering hope when all other options had been exhausted. The initial assistance provided by the Société de Bienfaisance Creole seemed genuine and generous, as Thibodeau personally delivered food, clothing, and small amounts of money to Celeste's household. That he spoke compassionately about her situation and assured her that the society's resources would be available to help her through her period of crisis. Most importantly, he offered her children educational opportunities that would normally have been beyond her means, promising that they would receive the kind of schooling that could lift them out of poverty and provide them with bright futures. However, the true nature of Thibodeau's organization became apparent when Celeste was invited to a special gathering where she would meet other families who had benefited from the society's assistance. The meeting was held in the basement of the townhouse, and Celeste was shocked to discover that the charitable organization, was actually a front for a sophisticated criminal enterprise that specialized in the exploitation of vulnerable families and the trafficking of children to wealthy clients. Throughout the Gulf Coast region, the basement gathering revealed the horrific truth about the Société de Bienfaisance Creole's operations, as Celeste witnessed children being examined and evaluated like livestock by well-dressed men who spoke casually about their preferences for different ages, appearances, and levels of training. The children who had been educated by the society had actually been groomed for lives of servitude and abuse, their innocence systematically destroyed to satisfy the depraved appetites of clients who paid handsomely for access to young victims. Thibodeau's explanation of the society's true purpose was delivered with the same eloquent compassion he had shown during his visits to Celeste's home, as he described the trafficking operation as a form of economic opportunity that allowed poor families to transform their children into valuable assets. He argued that the children would be better fed and housed as servants in wealthy households than they would be living in poverty with their families, and that the money paid for their services would allow their parents to escape the cycle of destitution that trapped so many in the Treme district. The realization that she had unknowingly delivered her children into the hands of monsters filled Celeste with a rage so intense that it seemed to burn through her very soul. She had trusted Thibodeau and his associates, had been grateful for their apparent kindness, and had allowed them access to her most precious possessions in the belief that they were offering genuine assistance. The betrayal was not merely personal but represented a violation of every sacred bond that connected parents to children and community members to each other. Celeste's immediate attempt to reclaim her children was met with cold laughter from Thibodeau, who explained that they had already been sold to clients in distant cities and that any attempt to interfere with the society's operations would result in her own disappearance. He reminded her that she was a poor widow with no social connections or legal resources, while his organization enjoyed the protection of wealthy and powerful individuals who could ensure that any complaints she might make would be ignored or suppressed. The threat implicit in Thibodeau's words was reinforced by the presence of several large men who made it clear that Celeste's continued existence depended upon her acceptance of the situation and her willingness to remain silent about what she had witnessed. She was escorted from the townhouse with a warning that any attempt to contact the authorities or interfere with the society's activities would result in consequences that would extend far beyond her own death. The walk home through the darkened streets of the French Quarter was the longest of Celeste's life, as she struggled to process the magnitude of the disaster that had befallen her family. Her children were gone, stolen by people she had trusted, and there seemed to be no earthly power that could help her recover them. The legal system was controlled by the same wealthy interests that protected Thibodeau's organization, while the police were either corrupt or powerless to act against criminals with sufficient resources and connections. It was during this dark night of the soul that Celeste remembered the stories her grandmother had told her about the Rougarou, the legendary shapeshifter of Louisiana folklore that was said to hunt those who violated the sacred laws that protected the innocent. According to these tales, the Rougarou was not simply a monster but a form of divine justice that manifested when human institutions failed to protect the vulnerable from predators who hid behind masks of respectability and social standing. The transformation ritual that Celeste performed that night was based on knowledge that had been passed down through generations of women in her family, practitioners of the spiritual traditions that connected Louisiana Creoles to their African and Caribbean roots. The ritual required her to sacrifice everything that connected her to her human identity, surrendering her hopes for a normal life in exchange for the power to become something that could hunt and destroy those who preyed upon children. The ceremony took place in the overgrown cemetery of St. Louis No. 1, where the spirits of the ancestors were said to be strongest and where the boundaries between the world of the living and the realm of the supernatural were thinnest. Celeste brought offerings of blood, rum, and tobacco to the tomb of Marie Laveau, the legendary voodoo queen whose spirit was believed to continue protecting the African-American community of New Orleans even after death. The invocation that Celeste spoke was in the ancient language of her ancestors, words that called upon the spirits of all mothers who had lost children to violence and exploitation throughout history. She offered her human form as a vessel for their collective rage, asking to be transformed into an instrument of vengeance that could track down and destroy those who had stolen her children and countless others like them. The response to her prayer was immediate and terrifying, as the very air around her began to shimmer with supernatural energy while the temperature dropped to levels that made her breath visible in the humid Louisiana night. The spirits that answered her call were not benevolent guardians but rather manifestations of primal fury that had been accumulating for centuries, waiting for the right moment to be unleashed upon a world that had allowed such injustices to flourish unchecked. The physical transformation that followed was both agonizing and ecstatic, as Celeste's human form was reshaped by forces that operated beyond the normal laws of biology and physics. Her bones elongated and strengthened, her muscles expanded and hardened, and her senses became supernaturally acute, allowing her to detect scents and sounds that were imperceptible to normal human perception. Most dramatically, her hands and feet developed claws that were harder than steel and sharper than any blade forged by human hands. However, the most significant change was not physical but spiritual, as Celeste's consciousness was expanded to encompass the experiences and memories of every mother who had ever lost a child to violence. This collective awareness gave her not only the motivation for her supernatural hunt but also the knowledge she would need to track down and destroy the network of predators that had stolen her children. The first manifestation of Celeste's transformed nature occurred 3 nights after the ritual, when she appeared outside the townhouse where the Société de Bienfaisance Creole conducted its operations. Her new form was a terrifying hybrid of human and beast, retaining enough of her original appearance to be recognizable while displaying obvious supernatural characteristics that marked her as something beyond normal human experience. The security guards who protected Thibodeau's headquarters were experienced men who had dealt with various threats over the years, but they were completely unprepared for an encounter with a supernatural predator whose abilities transcended anything in their previous experience. Celeste moved through their defenses like a force of nature, her enhanced senses allowing her to avoid detection while her supernatural strength enabled her to disable opponents without making sounds that might alert others to her presence. The confrontation with Thibodeau himself took place in his private office, where he was conducting a late-night meeting with potential clients who were interested in purchasing children for their personal use. The appearance of the Rougarou woman in the middle of their business discussion created a scene of terror and chaos that would be remembered by survivors for the rest of their lives. Celeste's supernatural form allowed her to extract information from Thibodeau and his associates through methods that combined physical intimidation with psychic abilities that enabled her to read their memories and emotions directly. She learned the locations where her children were being held, the identities of the clients who had purchased them, and the full scope of the trafficking network that extended throughout the Gulf Coast region and beyond. The justice that Celeste administered to Thibodeau and his immediate associates was swift and terrible, as her claws and fangs made quick work of men who had spent years believing themselves to be untouchable. However, her supernatural transformation had given her a perspective that extended far beyond simple revenge, as she understood that these individuals were merely the visible representatives of a much larger system of exploitation that would continue to operate unless it was completely destroyed. The hunt that followed Celeste's initial attack on the Société de Bienfaisance Creole lasted for several months and took her throughout Louisiana and into neighboring states as she tracked down every member of the trafficking network and every client who had participated in the exploitation of children. Her supernatural abilities made her an impossibly effective predator, capable of tracking her quarry across vast distances and through elaborate security measures that would have stopped any normal pursuer. Each confrontation followed a similar pattern, as Celeste would appear without warning in locations where her targets believed themselves to be safe, extract information about other members of the network, and then administer the kind of justice that reflected the nature of their crimes. The supernatural nature of her attacks created a climate of terror among those involved in child trafficking, as they realized that they were being hunted by something that operated beyond the reach of conventional defenses. The recovery of her own children was accomplished during a raid on a plantation house outside Baton Rouge, where they were being held along with dozens of other victims who had been kidnapped from families throughout the region. The reunion was both joyful and heartbreaking, as Celeste discovered that her children had been traumatized by their experiences but had somehow managed to retain their essential humanity despite the horrors they had endured. However, Celeste's transformation into the Rougarou woman had changed her in ways that made it impossible for her to simply return to her previous life as a human mother. The supernatural forces that had empowered her hunt continued to demand expression, and she found herself compelled to continue tracking down and destroying predators who threatened children throughout the region. The establishment of Celeste's supernatural sanctuary took place in an abandoned plantation house deep in the Louisiana bayous, where she created a refuge for children who had been rescued from trafficking networks and other forms of exploitation. The sanctuary operated according to rules that blended human compassion with supernatural protection, as Celeste's transformed nature allowed her to detect and repel any threats that might endanger the children under her care. The children who found their way to Celeste's sanctuary came from a variety of backgrounds and circumstances, but they all shared the common experience of having been failed by the human institutions that were supposed to protect them. Under Celeste's care, they were able to heal from their traumas while learning skills that would enable them to protect themselves and others from similar predators in the future. The supernatural nature of the sanctuary was evident in the way it seemed to exist partially outside normal space and time, making it impossible for unwanted visitors to locate or approach without Celeste's permission. The bayou itself appeared to serve as a natural defense system, with alligators, snakes, and other dangerous creatures acting as guardians that would attack anyone who approached with malevolent intentions. The legend of the Rougarou woman spread throughout Louisiana and beyond, creating a folklore tradition that served both as entertainment and as a warning to those who might consider harming children. Parents would tell their children stories about the supernatural protector who watched over the innocent, while those with guilty consciences found themselves looking over their shoulders whenever they ventured into areas where the Rougarou woman was said to hunt. The law enforcement response to the Rougarou woman's activities was complicated by the fact that her targets were typically criminals whose deaths were not mourned by their communities. Police investigations into the supernatural killings were often perfunctory, as officers found it difficult to generate enthusiasm for pursuing someone who was eliminating predators that the legal system had failed to stop through conventional means. However, some authorities recognized that the Rougarou woman's activities represented a challenge to the rule of law that could not be ignored, regardless of the moral character of her victims. Special task forces were organized to investigate the supernatural killings, though these efforts were consistently frustrated by the otherworldly nature of the crimes and the lack of conventional evidence that could be used in court proceedings. The Catholic Church's response to the Rougarou woman phenomenon was similarly complex, as theologians struggled to determine whether her actions represented divine justice or demonic influence. Some priests argued that her supernatural transformation was evidence of satanic corruption, while others suggested that she might be serving as an instrument of God's wrath against those who harmed the innocent. The theological debate was further complicated by reports that the Rougarou woman had been seen attending midnight masses at remote churches throughout Louisiana, apparently seeking spiritual guidance and comfort despite her transformed nature. These sightings suggested that her supernatural condition had not completely severed her connection to her Catholic faith, though the exact nature of her relationship with divine authority remained unclear. The impact of the Rougarou woman legend on Louisiana culture was profound and lasting, as it provided a framework for understanding how supernatural forces could intervene in human affairs when conventional justice failed. The story became integrated into the rich tapestry of Louisiana folklore, joining other tales of supernatural protectors and avengers who served the cause of cosmic justice. The feminist implications of Celeste's transformation were explored by scholars studying the role of women in Louisiana folklore and the ways in which traditional stories reflected the experiences of mothers who had been forced to protect their children without support from male-dominated institutions. The Rougarou woman represented a powerful archetype of maternal fury that transcended normal human limitations to become a force of nature. The psychological impact of the Rougarou woman legend on potential predators was significant, as the story created a climate of supernatural fear that served as a deterrent to those who might consider harming children. The knowledge that their crimes might attract the attention of a supernatural hunter who could not be stopped by conventional means added a new dimension to the risks associated with child exploitation. Modern researchers studying the Rougarou woman phenomenon have noted its relevance to contemporary discussions about child protection and the limitations of legal systems in addressing crimes against vulnerable populations. The story provides a historical perspective on how communities have used supernatural narratives to express their frustration with inadequate institutional responses to child abuse and trafficking. The environmental aspects of the Rougarou woman legend have also attracted attention from scholars studying the relationship between Louisiana folklore and the natural landscape of the Bayou region. The story reflects a deep understanding of the swampland as a place where normal rules do not apply and where supernatural forces can manifest more easily than in civilized areas. The economic impact of the Rougarou woman legend on Louisiana tourism has been substantial, as the story has become a major attraction for visitors interested in the state's supernatural heritage. Tour companies offer expeditions into the bayous where Celeste is said to have established her sanctuary, though none claim to have actually encountered the supernatural protector herself. Contemporary child protection advocates have embraced the Rougarou woman story as a symbol of the fierce determination required to protect children from predators who exploit their vulnerability. The legend serves as a reminder that the protection of innocence sometimes requires extraordinary measures that go beyond conventional legal and social responses. The artistic legacy of the Rougarou woman has influenced Louisiana's creative community, inspiring works of literature, music, and visual art that explore themes of transformation, justice, and maternal protection. These artistic interpretations help to keep the story alive while also providing new perspectives on its meaning and relevance for contemporary audiences. The spiritual dimensions of Celeste's story continue to resonate with practitioners of Louisiana's various religious traditions, who see in her transformation a powerful example of how divine forces can work through human agents to address injustices that exceed the capacity of earthly institutions. The story provides a framework for understanding how supernatural intervention can serve the cause of cosmic justice. As we approach the 121st anniversary of Celeste's transformation into the Rougarou woman, her story continues to inspire those who work to protect children from exploitation and abuse. The legend serves as a reminder that the protection of innocence is a sacred duty that may require extraordinary sacrifice, and that the love of a mother for her children can become a force that transcends the normal limitations of human existence. The hunt that began in the streets of New Orleans in 1903 continues today in the work of those who dedicate their lives to protecting children from predators who would exploit their vulnerability. The spirit of the Rougarou woman lives on in every person who refuses to accept that some crimes are too powerful to be stopped and who is willing to transform themselves into whatever is necessary to defend the innocent. If this terrifying tale of supernatural transformation and maternal fury has left you questioning the true nature of justice and the lengths to which love will go to protect the innocent, please show your support by hitting that like button. Your engagement helps us continue to explore these profound mysteries where human emotion becomes supernatural force and where the boundaries between civilization and wilderness dissolve in the face of ultimate truth. And if you haven't already joined our community of protectors here at Bayou Nightmares, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We delve deep into the supernatural guardians of the American South every week, bringing you stories of transformation, justice, and the eternal struggle between those who would harm the innocent and those who rise to defend them. From the bayous of Louisiana to the hidden sanctuaries where the supernatural protects the vulnerable, we explore the mysteries that remind us that some loves are stronger than death itself. It's important to remember that while the stories we share on Bayou Nightmares are carefully researched and often based on historical accounts, they are presented as entertainment and educational content. Some elements may be dramatized or interpreted through the lens of folklore and legend, though they are frequently inspired by real experiences of loss, transformation, and the eternal human struggle to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Until we meet again in the realm where love becomes legend and protection takes supernatural form, keep watching over the innocent, keep believing in the power of transformation, and remember that sometimes the greatest monsters are those who prey upon children, while the greatest heroes are those who become monsters to stop them. This has been Bayou Nightmares, where the hunt never ends, justice wears many faces, and love transformed becomes the most powerful force in any universe.